Ezel? Don't know her. Aggravating? Don't know him either. In this house, we respect Garmore. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Garmore Simp channel, where we simp for Garmore. This was originally something I was planning on doing after I went to Springfest. This was the deck I was planning on playing if I didn't end up playing Victor again. I was kind of hoping to just catch people off guard, steal some games, and if that didn't happen, my teammates would carry me to the top 8 maybe. And if they didn't, I was still gonna make this video anyway. This is basically just a premium version of the old Garmore Solitaire deck. The old Liberator Garmore deck where you just sat there and called over and over and over, got your Brenius up to crazy levels of power, and then you hit with a Brenius and unflip all your damage and do it all again next turn. This deck is very similar, but it has to make some sacrifices to be able to get to that point. But with a lot of the stuff that we got back in Mysterious Fortune, it's actually really good and it's a lot of fun. So obviously we run the playset of Garmore. The Garmore name is not as important as it used to be, but you know, it's a Garmore deck, so we run Garmore. Next up in grade 3s, we have 3 copies of Full Cavalier Dragon. You can also run Sagramore in this spot. In fact, I was running Sagramore up until recently. The only reason I'm not right now is because Sagramore calls from hand, and just about all of our effects trigger off of being called from the deck. So we really want to get top calls more than anything, and even though this is less choice when you call, it still calls from the deck, so it works a little better, and you don't actually have to call what you look at. So it's not too bad. Like if you see a trigger and you want to leave it up on top there, you can. Don't quote me on that. I don't know if that's true or not, but I feel like it is. Next, we go to grade 2s. And we play 4 copies of Night of Daylight Canarius. This is a pretty flexible spot. It just needs to be a grade 2 that can check top 3 and call. The reason I've settled on Canarius is because it's when placed from anywhere. It could be from deck, it can be from hand, doesn't really matter. And that's really important because he's one of the only cards that functions that way. If you really wanted to, there's a whole host of other options you could do. You could go for new Wonder Ezel, basically will accomplish the same thing, but again, calls from hand. Affles calls from deck, but he also needs to be placed from hand, so he's not quite as flexible as Canarius. You can do the old Lop Ear Shooter, but same thing, needs to be placed from deck. So unlike Canarius, where if you just open with him in hand, you can't just call him later and get the same skills off. You could run Kahedin. Kahedin is also an option, but you're not getting the same amount of value unless you're running Hole, and we do not run Hole because grade 1 space is very, very tight, and he also costs a Counterblast, and we do not have a lot of ways to refund Counterblast in this deck. Up until recently, I was also running Fomgol in this spot. Fomgol is also very free, and we also want most things in this deck to be as free as possible, because like I said, not a whole lot of Counterblast refunding in this deck. And this also is a high beast for if you want to do high beast shenanigans with the Garmore Stride. We're not really focusing on the Garmore Stride as much. You still can, it's just not the main focus anymore. From there, we have 3 copies of Providential Angel. This is one of your win cons. This is very, very important. You could probably bump it up to 4 if you really wanted to, but space in this deck is already really tight, and with the amount of digging you do through the deck, it's really not too much of a problem to see it. I know the secret's kind of out of the bag with this card because of, I think, the World Champion deck was a Gold Paladin and used this. They just used the 1, I believe, and just pull it out with Ultima. If you really wanted to, you could probably even drop 2 of these and run 2 Bobo in its place if you're really worried about being damage denied. But this deck really doesn't care about damage denial because most everything in the deck is free. So for now, I am keeping it at 3, and it seems to be working pretty well. From there, we have our other main win con, and it is 4 copies of Cloudwing Eagle. I have not seen anybody talking about this card, and I am honestly confused as to why. This is our replacement for the old grade 2 Brenius that we ran in the Garmore Solitaire deck. It's really, really good. It's basically both Brenius and Bruno in one card. It's also a high beast, which works for synergies with the Garmore Stride, but like I said, that rarely comes up anymore. It's really, really good. Every time you call something, whether it's from deck or from hand, or if you ride or stride, it gets plus 5k. This thing will get absolutely bonkers. I've gotten upwards of like 20 calls. I think I topped out at 24 calls, which at that point, this is over 100k. It's really, really stupid. It is basically your main win con. If you don't see a bird, you're probably gonna die. But thankfully, we have a lot of ways to dig in this deck, and it's not too much of a thing to worry about. From there, we go to our grade 1s, and probably our most ideal ride target is 4 copies of Improve Falcon. Almost never use this as a perfect guard. Ideally, I like to ride this card and then Soul Blast it later to get it in the drop. Its skill is that you can, it's actually been errated, where if you have 2 of these in the drop, you can bind one of them and then choose 2 of your rear guards, put them on the bottom of the deck, check top 3 and call something. It is way too good for this deck. It helps this deck do what it wants to do way too well, and it can also help you shuffle triggers back into your deck, or a lot of your combo extenders you can throw back into the deck. If you just drew into them and didn't get to actually use them, you give them another chance at triggering. Then we have 4 copies of Dindrain. You could probably make this a flex spot. I wouldn't though, just because this card is too good. This is our only way to countercharge in the deck, and it can also work to help us dig for more pieces if we're just not seeing what we need or want to see. And it's also nice because with Providential Angel needing you to only have 1 card in hand to activate its skill, a lot of times what you can do in this deck is call your hand down, get down to 1 hand card, hold off on a lot of your draw skills, and then once you get this activated, you can start plussing and drawing your hand back up from there. Next up, 4 copies of Dexkull. This is just another combo extender. Same thing when it's when placed from deck. Check top 3 and then call one of them to the circle it is currently on. I wouldn't really switch this out. This is basically the slot that used to be taken up by Zoran in that old Garmore Solitaire deck. There's also High Beast, because that matters if you're in that Garmore Stride, but it matters less and less, I find. But until we get another grade 1 that can do what this does, but better or earlier, not really a way to kind of get around having that in there. Next, we go to our grade 0s. 3 copies of Night of Early Dawn Cole. Unite, push it into Soul, check top 3, call something. It's an act, so you can't do any mid-battle shenanigans, but this is just too good not to run. You see it, call it down. You can just keep extending your combos, keep chain calling, and making your birds really, really, really big. Then we've got our triggers. We've got 4 copies of the old Premium Collection Crit. This is one of the ways you can kind of call your hand down and then recoup it for the Providential Angel skill, because you can just have these on board, and then when you swing it through Vanguard, they go to Soul and you draw a card, and then you get your drive checks and you can bring your hand slowly back up. Next, we have one of the more important cards in the deck with 4 Catch Goal. Catch Goal is just the MVP because, you know, you see it on your top 3, just call it unless you see it off of the Catch Goal skill. That's the only downside, is that Catch Goal can't call another Catch Goal. He's also important because he shuffles the deck. A lot of the cards in this deck, or at least some of the cards in the deck, will set cards to the bottom, and a lot of times you'll be sending triggers to the bottom. And it's kind of important to know and chain your calls together to where if you need to dig, you use the ones that set into bottom. And then once you've got what you needed, you can start using the skills that shuffle your deck to get all those things mixed back up again. Because the real strength of this deck lies in thinning your deck to the point where it's just triggers. It will get to late game and you will be to a point where your deck is only like 12 to 15 cards and over half of them are triggers. I think I remember checking at one game I had, my deck was 12 cards and 9 of them were triggers. At that point, it's really hard to lose, because especially because if you hit a Catch Goal on your drive checks, you just stand one of your Cloudwing Eagles and beat their face in with a 100k rear guard. And especially when they can only use 1 Sentinel for that turn on Providential Angel, it's really, really good. You'll honestly just have your opponents, like once they see what's happened or you see one single stand trigger, they just start wrapping it up because they can't do anything. Next, we've got 4 copies of Gigantech Ringer. Yes, we're running 8 stand because honestly, stands are very OP in this deck because standing a Cloudwing Eagle pretty much wins you games. This is also one of our draw engines. Again, same kind of thing with the trigger. You can just call down your hand, and then once you have the 1 card in hand, activate Providential Angel to restrict your opponent to 1 Sentinel a turn, and then start plussing with things like Gigantech Ringer and start triggering your skills then. And nothing too fancy. We've got 4 heals. You can do a 2-2 split with Shaggy Rabbit if you really care about the soul charge and counter charge, or soul charge or counter charge. It does come up sometimes, but in my experience, it hasn't come up enough to warrant running it as much. I did have it in the deck, but not anymore. Plus, we're running 8 stand, and hitting old triggers really hurts, so we really want to have as many new triggers as possible. And then just starter, V starter. It can be whatever you want. You can run Spring Breeze if you want. I just prefer the old art more, and I don't really like the new art at all. And plus, this kind of can freak your opponent out because they think you're playing Ezel, and then all of a sudden you pull out Garmore and you start chaining 25 calls in a turn, and then the Cloudwing Eagle beats their face in and they don't know what's happening. Next, we've got our G units. Starting off, 3 copies of the Garmore Stride. You don't even need to run 3. You could drop it down to 2 or even just 1. This stride is not as important anymore. Until we can get Brenius back, or they give us a V version of Liberator Garmore, this isn't as important. We can still go into it sometimes, and it can still give us some really fun, nutty plays, but it's honestly just not as important anymore. A lot of times you'll just end up using it for flip fodder for things, but other than that, it's okay. Sometimes you can get the high B skill off where you give them an extra crit, but just to be able to counterblast 1, soul blast 1, and continuously check top 3 call, check top 3 call is really, really good. Next up, we have what you'll probably go into more often than not, and that is Spear X. This card is honestly what we go into more, and because people see Garmore, they tend not to damage deny us as much because they don't know how the deck works, at least in my experience. So you can very well, like, ideally go first, Superior Stride into Spear X, and his skill of Soul Blast 1 to check the top 5 and call 2 is really, really good in this deck because you can hit 2 catch goals, or a catch goal and a coal, or just things that will just chain and chain and chain, and then your eagles get really, really big. Next, to Heavenly Law Gurgit. I can't even tell you what this card does offhand anymore. I never go into it anymore, but it's there. It's an option. It can give you the plus 2k on Canarius if you really want it to. Never really have a need for it. What does this actually do? I changed my mind. This card is really good because you can build like a whole new board in the middle of your battle phase, because checking top 7 and calling 1 can end up turning into checking top 7 and calling a whole new board. So that's really good. 2 Gurgit Helios, just in case like nothing is going right. You got nothing's going your way. You can just call this, get a quad drive. Again, never really go into it, never really have the need. More often than not, we just stride Spear X, and then sometimes we stride Garmore. Really is all that this deck needs. Next, we have a single copy of Scourge Point Dragon, because it's actually kind of good in this deck. If you are getting damage denied super hard, oh well, most of the stuff in our deck is free or costs soul. And this works basically like the Eagle. Not quite as good as the Eagle, because the Eagle is when you call anything from anywhere. This is only from deck. But you can still get just crazy, crazy numbers off of it. And so this is your out. But you could also just go into Gurgit Helios for the quad drive, but honestly, getting super, super huge numbers I think is probably better. It's Ultima. Like, what? Did you expect it to be a budget deck just because it was Garmore? No, we actually like to win games. And with the way this deck works, you can just end up first stride, Superior Stride, Spear X, flip something up with its skill, G-Guard, and then with all the digging and drawing we do, you can just second stride Ultima and win the game right there, because you will have massive, massive eagles on board. You will have the angel with the 1 sentinel a turn restrict, and then if you hit a stand and you stand all of your eagles and your huge columns, it's just, there's literally nothing your opponent can do. This is honestly why the deck works as well as it does. The only thing we have to worry about is things being faster. But considering we call from deck mostly, we can survive quite a bit. The only thing that this deck requires is for you to know when to go in. If your opponent's only at 1 damage and then you decide to just dump your hand on board just for the Providential Angel skill, honestly, if they're only at 2 damage, if you just dump your hand on board to give the Providential Angel skill and to buff your Eagles up as much as you can, you're probably not going to win. It's usually better to play more conservatively until you know, oh, they're not going to be able to stop anything I do this turn. And usually that's when you go into Ultima. Then we've got our G guards, 2 Slamy Flare. This is really, really handy. It puts cards back to the bottom of your deck, which is actually kind of handy for this deck because we can get triggers back to the bottom of the deck. We can get catch goals back into the deck. We can get crits back into the deck if for some reason you didn't stuff them into the soul when your Vanguard attacked. And plus, each time you place a Guardian, like so when you place this and you get your 2 Guardians off the top, you just gave your Eagles plus 15k, and that makes them very, very hard for your opponent to remove them unless they use a skill of some kind, and then we cry. 1 Elise. This isn't one of those cards I honestly can't tell you what it does because I would never go into it anymore. Elise can be handy because you can check your top 2, call something when the attack doesn't hit, call it to your rear guard. It can be good, never really makes a difference for me. Honestly, it just kind of helps where if you had to stride into Scourge Point, you can call Elise and get your GB3 so you can stride into Ultima. This deck is smash face with and then go into Ultima and then win because Ultima is way too good. And then 1 Dismal, just to protect your birds. If you only have 1 bird and they kill your bird and you don't get another bird, well, you're kind of screwed there. So Dismal for that scenario. But that is my premium Garmore deck profile. I just haven't seen literally anybody talking about this deck, which is a little weird to me. Maybe it's just me because I'm obsessed and loved that old Garmore Solitaire deck, and I just want to make it work in premium. But I hope you give this deck a try. It's honestly a lot of fun, and when things go your way, they really go your way. I've been kind of jokingly calling it the Garmore lottery or like the Garmore slot machine because you're constantly just cranking the lever, checking top 3, seeing what you get, and then hoping you win big because you just chain into like 24 calls, and then you have 1 to 2 to 3 really, really big birds on board, and then you hit a stand and on Ultima, and your opponent cries and they just scoop because they have literally nothing they can do in that moment. But thanks for watching, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know what I did wrong. But you can't because this deck is streamlined to a point where I honestly don't know what I would change other than what I already outlined. But anyways, till next time, guys.